The Tibetan alphabet is an abugida of Indic origin used to write the Tibetan language as well as Dzongkha, the Sikkimese language, Ladakhi, and sometimes Balti. The printed form of the alphabet is called uchen script, while the handwritten cursive form used in everyday writing is called script. The alphabet is very closely linked to a broad ethnic Tibetan identity, spanning across areas in China, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. The Tibetan alphabet is ancestral to the Limbu alphabet, the Lepcha alphabet, and the multilingual Phags-pa script. The Tibetan alphabet is romanized in a variety of ways. This article employs the Wiley transliteration system. History: the creation of the Tibetan alphabet is attributed to Thimi Sampota of the mid-7th century. Tradition holds that Thimi Sampota, a minister of Songtsen Gampo, was sent to India to study the art of writing, and upon his return introduced the alphabet. The form of the letters is based on an Indic alphabet of that period. 3 orthographic standardizations were developed. The most important, an official orthography aimed to facilitate the translation of Buddhist scriptures, emerged during the early 9th century. Standard orthography has not altered since then, while the spoken language has changed by, for example, losing complex consonant clusters. As a result, in all modern Tibetan dialects, in particular in the Standard Tibetan of Lhasa, there is a great divergence between current spelling and current pronunciation. This divergence is the basis of an argument in favor of spelling reform, to write Tibetan as it is pronounced, for example, writing Kagyu instead of Bkargyud. In contrast, the pronunciation of the Balti, Ladakhi and Burig languages adheres more closely to the archaic spelling. Description: the Tibetan alphabet has 30 basic letters, sometimes known as radicals, for consonants. A description of the actual pronunciation of individual letters in Standard Tibetan precedes a chart showing the traditional romanization of Classical Tibetan. As in other Indic scripts, each consonant letter assumes an inherent. However, a unique aspect of the Tibetan script is that the consonants can be written either as radicals, or they can be written in other forms, such as superscripts and subscripts. The superscript position above a radical is reserved for the consonants R, L, and S, while the subscript position under a radical is for the consonants Y, R, L, and W. To understand how this works, one can look at the radical Ka, and see what happens when it becomes Kra, or a Ka. In both cases, the symbol for Ka is used, but when the R is in the middle of the consonant and vowel, it is added as a subscript. On the other hand, when the R comes before the consonant and vowel, it is added as a superscript. R actually changes form when it is above most other consonants. Thus a 1/2 number 3/4 Ka. However, an exception to this is the cluster a 1/2 number 3/4 unregistered trademark RNYA. Similarly, the consonants W, R, and Y change form when they are beneath other consonants. Thus a 1/2 euro a 3/4 quad. A 1/2 euro a 3/4 squared Kra. A 1/2 euro a 3/4 plus or minus Kya. Besides being written as subscripts and superscripts, some consonants can also be placed in proscript, postscript, or post-postscript positions. For instance, the consonants G, D, B, M, and a euro unregistered trademarker can be used in the proscript position to the left of other radicals, while the position after a radical can be held by the 10 consonants G, N, B, D, M, a euro unregistered trademarker, R, and G, S, and L. The third position, the post-postscript position, is solely for the consonants D and S. The vowels used in the alphabet are A, I, U, E, and O. While the vowel A is included in each consonant or radical, the other vowels are indicated by marks. Thus a 1/2 euro Ka, a 1/2 euro a 1/2 squared Ki, a 1/2 euro a 1/2 Ku, a 1/2 euro a 1/2 K, a 1/2 euro a 1/2 1/4 Ko. The vowels I, E, and O are placed above consonants as diacritics, while the vowel U is placed underneath consonants. Old Tibetan included a jagai verso of uncertain meaning. There is no distinction between long and short vowels in written Tibetan, except in loanwords, especially transcribed from the Sanskrit. In the Tibetan script, the syllables are written from left to right. Syllables are separated by a tseg. Since many Tibetan words are monosyllabic, this mark often functions almost as a space. Spaces are not used to divide words. Although some Tibetan dialects are tonal, the language had no tone at the time of the script's invention, and there are no dedicated symbols for tone. However, since tones developed from segmental features, they can usually be correctly predicted by the archaic spelling of Tibetan words. As in other Indic scripts, clustered consonants are often stacked vertically. Unfortunately, some fonts and applications do not support this behavior for Tibetan, so these examples may not display properly. You might have to download a font such as Tibetan Machine Uni. Transliteration of Sanskrit. Vowels consonants the Sanskrit cerebral consonants currency ya currency aaa are represented by reversing the letters a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 currency to give a 1/2 sh 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 yen. It is a classic rule to transliterate a currency sh currency a currency a currency to a 1/2 unregistered trademark a 1/2 sh 1/2 a 1/2 a 3/4, respectively. Nowadays, a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 a 1/2 a 3/4 can also be used. Unicode. Tibetan was originally one of the scripts in the first version of the Unicode standard in 1991, in the Unicode block U+1000 a U+104F. However, in 1993, in version 1.1, it was removed. The Tibetan script was re-added in July 1996 with the release of version 2.0. The Unicode block for Tibetan is U+0F00 a U+0FFF. It includes letters, digits and various punctuation marks and special symbols used in religious texts. Transliteration. Several competing transliteration and transcription systems have been devised for the Tibetan script. The most widely used one is the Wiley transliteration. Others include the Library of Congress system and the IPA-based transliteration. Input method and keyboard layout. The first version of Microsoft Windows to support the Tibetan keyboard layout is MIS Windows Vista. The layout has been available in Linux since September 2007. In Ubuntu 12.04, one can install Tibetan language support through /language support/install remove languages. The input method can be turned on from /keyboard layout, adding Tibetan keyboard layout. The layout applies the similar layout as in Microsoft Windows. Mac OS X introduced Tibetan Unicode support with OS X version 10.5 and later, now with 3 different keyboard layouts available: Tibetan Y, Tibetan QWERTY and Tibetan Notani. See also, Tibetan calligraphy, Tibetan Braille, Dzongkha Braille, Tibetan typefaces, Wiley transliteration, Tibetan pinyin, THDL simplified phonetic transcription, TICE, input method for Tibetan script, Balti script, Limbu script. Notes. References: Asher, R. E. ed. The Encyclopedia of Language and Linguistics. Tarrytown, New York, Pergamon Press, 1994. 10 vol. Bear, Stephen V. The Classical Tibetan Language. Reprinted by Delhi, Sri Satguru. Chamberlain, Bradford Lynn 2008. Script selection for Tibetan-related languages in multiscriptal environments. International Journal of the Sociology of Language 192-117 a 132. Kshamadikara Paragraph S, Alexander A Grammar of the Tibetan Language. Reprinted by Delhi, Sri Satguru. Kshamadikara Paragraph S, Alexander. Sanskrit Tibetan English Vocabulary 2 vols. Reprinted by Delhi, Sri Satguru. Daniels, Peter T. and William Bright. The World a Unregistered Trademark S Writing Systems. New York, Oxford University Press, 1996. Das, Sarat Chandra, The Sacred and Ornamental Characters of Tibet. Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, Volume 57, pages 41 a 48 and 9 plates. Das, Sarat Chandra, An Introduction to the Grammar of the Tibetan Language. Reprinted by Delhi, Motilal Banarsidas. Jack, Guillaume 2012. A New Transcription System for Old and Classical Tibetan, Linguistics of the Tibeto-Burman Area, 35.389-96. JAR Currency SCHKE, Heinrich August Tibetan Grammar. Corrected by Sunil Gupta. Reprinted by Delhi, Sri Satguru. External links, Tibetan calligraphy or Euro, How to Write the Tibetan Script. Elements of the Tibetan Writing System. Unicode Area UOFOOUOFFF, Tibetan Script, Encoding Model of the Tibetan Script in the UCS, Overview of Tibetan Unicode Fonts, Tibetan Scripts, Fonts and related issues. Euro THDL articles on Unicode font issues. Free cross-platform open-type fonts are Euro Unicode compatible. Free Tibetan Fonts Project, Ancient Scripts, Tibetan.